All right.
I'd like to welcome everybody to our education committee this afternoon. Thanks for everyone for showing up this afternoon. Our first item is to approve the minutes from the April 18th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Next item is Students Against Hate Discrimination. We'll be discussing the ethnic studies curriculum. I believe you'll be leading this discussion?
Sure. So,
Sorry, I just told her.
Sounds like a
Diane
plan.
has a part, and Kingsley will have a part to address too. But I know
Right.
Diane and Brady have the kind of the curricular focus part.
right, so we had brought, if you read the minutes from April, right? This came up at that meeting when we talked about the ethnic studies possibilities after the students had said that they would like to see a course in that area. So in one of the board docs that we presented to you really talks about the 4 options that we presented at that time, which included, let me open it up here. The possibility of a graduation requirement, that was considered. Obviously, that has a lot of implications if you want to change your graduation requirements for students. That may or may not be beneficial for all kids. Then we offered the option of a trimester elective, so providing the course as an option for students to be able to participate in. And again, some implications there on the document there. The third option, and that's the one we settled on, was to try to incorporate the material for an ethics studies curriculum into our existing required courses. And that really, I think we fell on that one mainly because we knew it could impact all students, and it wasn't going to be in addition to a graduation requirement. And we could also impact students at the 7th grade level and then again at the 9th grade level. So we talked about trying to do that. In a minute, Brady can maybe talk about the work that's been done towards that. And then the 4th option was just something that was kind of uniquely presented to us. It was called a Global Studies Certificate. That is something that would be new to Iowa, and it was just a way to maybe highlight some ethnic studies work that's been going on, courses that do incorporate some of those themes, and then allow students to really have a concentration in that area. So those were the options we presented at that time, and like I said, we landed on option 3, but I understand if we want to revisit that. And Brady can kind of talk maybe a little bit about what we've done and what's worked well and maybe not worked well with option 3.
Sure. So April was when that decision was made at the Ed Committee. In May of that same year, the state of Iowa's Board of Education approved the social studies, the new social studies standards that were a sort of a 2-year plus process in terms of creation and review. And the big change in the new social studies standards for the state of Iowa, and they are K-12 standards, there's 3 big changes. For K-8, they went to a prescribed, in kindergarten you do this, in 1st grade you teach that, in 2nd grade, all the way up through 7th and 8th grade. So for us it worked out okay. Our alignment and our scope and sequence is all right. Where a lot of districts are having some struggles with that in their 7th and 8th grade in particular, in their sequencing. Our 7th grade global studies matches for the most part with what the state wants. But the 2 additions that were new, even by their own admission, as we wrote in that document, Iowa history has to be infused, K-12, and financial literacy. And those have created, especially in your K-8 social studies curriculum, a lot of conversation around the state, and it'll be a big conversation for us about how we do it. What it meant for our 7th and 8th grade is that we had to figure out a way to infuse both of those into the existing curriculum while also using the board directive on ethnic studies mini units, in that infusion. So it creates some pressure, I'd say, in terms of what we have, to cover and how we do it. I think it's an interesting contrast when the state, is saying we want Iowa history, which is, well, I guess we're on the public record. It's not always been the most exciting thing for many social studies teachers or students to have that, and then we're looking at something that's a little bit more global or cultural. So we ran into some, challenges in terms of doing all 3 of those, and I think. One of the things that we have done that's been successful is work on our unit-based understandings by design models for that involve, figuring out what's essential for a student to understand and know and be able to do. And we tried, as we did that work, to really infuse some essential understandings that were specifically targeted at a more culturally proficient, and responsive curriculum. And so I included those in that, in that document. And teachers, after April of last year, have done some like a gap analysis, basically, to figure out where are we at with our curriculum. How can we infuse mini units that focus on ethnic studies into our existing curriculum? I'd say our social studies teachers are phenomenal. I mean, of course, I'm a little biased, but I think we have the strongest department in the district, and they've done some really, really good work. And I think that their response to me was, we do this work every day. This is a good, robust social studies class. If we're doing that sort of work, and we look at this as maybe a lens that we should be looking through every single day. That the idea of mini units was sort of hard to figure out in some ways, because it seemed you don't want it to be like, well, we did a mini unit, now we're done with that. It should be something that's sustained. So in reflecting, and that's sort of where we came to, and talking with the students, I think a deeper, more personalized dive into ethnic studies or a culturally responsive curriculum might I think it would give the students something that's different. I think it'd be really, really meaningful. I think the research, in those documents that Kingsley and others have put on there, support that. So that's sort of where we are as a district. We continue to do the work as social studies teachers. Fitting those three things in, is going to be just a challenge, to be honest. So I think that's where, in May, when that came back from the state after a big public comment period, because it's a new state standard, we're running into some challenges. So
If you were,
that's where we're at.
a summary of kind of what Brady talked about there too is that second document, if you're on board docs,
Oh,
the
thank you, yeah.
ethnic studies curriculum overview, and then he kind of spoke at the very end there to the findings and reflection piece. But I think what he did talk about is just kind of the interesting paradigm of what we talk about locally and we see as important things, and then what the state is prescribing, and that pressure piece he's talking about trying to put in those things that they've found is important and relevant that need to be pushed into the curriculum, and the things we're finding locally are important to our school community that need to be in there too, and kind of the interesting challenge that presents.
We sort of joke in our world history, Iowa history and world history, not that there can't be connections, but as we've sought them out, everyone keeps coming back to the Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug, it's been, you're going like, okay, but it has to be the sustained, a connection to world history. So it's just been an interesting puzzle to put together.
And then in the meantime, Kingsley's also been working on trying to bring some ethnic studies curriculum to the district. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that Brady and Martin talked about really kind of dovetail into the implicit bias and the cultural provision work that we're talking about. And so ultimately, if you're talking about sustained change and something that you want to make sure that's happening with all of our students, I think that this course of action that Brady and Diane are talking about are important. I think that there's the long-term or I always look at short-term and long-term goals. And so this is one where I feel like it's a long-term goal where we have to start somewhere. To be honest with you, that I dare say we're the first in kind of having this conversation as a district, because I keep getting calls from other districts as far as what we're doing in regards to this. And so it's tough trying to create and also help other districts or guide them in this work. So I think that's the first phase when we look at it from a long-term perspective. From a short-term perspective, I think that the students talked about the immediate need of wanting some type of class. And Dr. Covington is here, and I don't necessarily know that you have to share anything, but basically the class, I was going to read verbatim from what you have available. It's all in there from a syllabus perspective. I look at it from a project-based management class. Ultimately, there will be required readings that students would ensure that they are having some type of instructional knowledge of the area that they're going into, and ultimately look at it from a project-based standpoint, looking at different things that you can do in the community. But really gravitating me to this work was that many times we talk about social justice work, everybody wants to just talk about it theoretically. Nobody wants to actually do something about it. And so I really appreciated the opportunity for Dr. Covington to come in and say, this class in particular provides for an opportunity for you to have an interest in this particular area based on the curriculum material, and then say from that, I want to work on this particular project and have some type of project or some type of answer at the end of the work. And so really excited about what that means. I'll be honest with you, this is a class that she's already taught. She's taught at San Diego, is it State University? State University. And so the biggest part of the issue is how do we put it or fit it into our framework. And so a lot of the day-to-day we were looking at preparing, looking at times and how it would work. I think we've settled on some times, and we're hopeful as we're working, we're continuing pushing forward. Looking at third trimester as the date that we're going to introduce this. We have some of the curricular materials. All the information is there.
Okay, so you want to talk about how that would fit in our existing structure right now with
Yeah.
the trimester as far as how that delivery would look?
Yeah, so Diane can help me with a little bit. We were looking at basically, trying to fit a college course in a high school course is tough from a time standpoint. We talked to Dr. Covington. We really focused on kind of the 3 hours needed. I can't remember what it's called, minutes or per week that's that we need. And so ultimately we looked at a 6-period in AFT as a potential to have about an hour and 20 minutes over the course of 3 days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, as an opportunity for one high school, and then for the other high school, trying to fit it in within the 4th period hour, which we were told doesn't necessarily have the same type of rigorous course.
Just course selection.
Course selection, that's what I was looking for. Course selection that's there, and so students, right now I'm looking at my notes, students would then grab a lunch at the beginning of 4A, and then after they eat lunch, maybe they would start to trickle into the class a little early to make sure that they can have that time to get the class started. So there's still some next steps. I mean, I have a list of, wherever my next steps are, I have a list of next steps that we need to work on. We look at teacher of record. We have books that we need to talk about ordering. We need to, I think there we talked about getting talking with Julie Willman as far as, what was the name that you referenced?
A SCED code, just the
SCED
course
code.
title and number for the state.
I'm learning on
Yep.
a SCED code as well, and so there's some things that we have to logistically get done before we can say that this is a possibility, but we're in the right place, and I'm hopeful by the end of January, obviously we have to have something together to make sure that we move for third trimester. I'm really excited. This has been a long day, but this is exciting. This is exciting stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really exciting to have this conversation. And if you had a chance to look over the syllabus, I mean, to have that deep dive into those conversations, coupled with the work that Brady and Diane are talking about, I mean, that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of stuff. Really focused on social justice in that particular narrative, how we can bring it to those students. I think is I was going to say magical, but creative. That's what I was looking for.
So this is really pilot of the trimester elective, the option 2. It sounds like with the curriculum that you used before. It's a college class that we're going to be offering in our high schools.
Well, not technically. It's
Okay.
Dr. Covington has taught it as a college class.
Okay.
We've had to pare it down to make sure it's
I see.
appropriate for the high school
Okay.
setting, and so it'll be an elective course at the
Okay.
high school level.
Dual enrollment maybe at some point.
Mhm.
Right.
We considered that. We did. We looked into that. But,
Yeah.
right now, it's not a course that Iowa offers.
I see.
Mhm.
Okay. So sorry, go ahead, Tori.
So for the kids that have already made their schedule for third trimester, are they able to make changes at this point?
Mhm. The counselors could work with them. For some students, they'd have to have either a trimester course that they're going to opt out of and replace with this one, or they'd have to have a spot in their schedule. I can't imagine a student who's maybe already done the first 2 trimesters of a year-long course, all of a sudden abandoning that. But if a student had like I said, an opening in their schedule, they could switch things around relatively successfully. It doesn't mean that we can address all conflicts that might be there. So there may be one course that's only offered at the same time this one's offered, and we have that all the time. Students have to make a choice.
4th tends to be a popular open hour as well, so there are probably quite a few
That's what
students
City
who might
High
be,
said.
yeah,
Mhm.
be interested in this, who would have that easy ability to pick up the class.
Right, I think that was Kingsley's point about,
Yeah.
knowing that's an opportune time to maybe
Yeah.
try to target some students that aren't involved in a course at that point or looking for a different option. So they try to target those specific periods in the day where that might work.
And will students be getting a grade in the class?
So no, we wouldn't be
Okay.
looking at it from a grade perspective. We were basically going through some issues with or I guess for lack of a better word, barriers. And so ultimately, I think initially we thought about the early bird time. We were worried about barriers as far as transportation. So we wanted to make sure it happened during a school time frame. And then we looked at the fact of whether or not a lot of our students would be interested in grades to a particular course. And we thought that was really tough because we know that many of our students are so focused on what their GPA is, they may not necessarily want to take the course because of that. So we opted for, it's still an elective, but ultimately they just get credit for it.
Pass fail.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry,
Yep,
that was
yep.
it.
Yep.
What
Direct answer to your
ages?
question.
All ages, 9 through 12?
So it'll be at the high school level, and so obviously it'll be open for 9 through 12. I think the issue that I think is just being articulated is the time frame. And so I would presume we would have more 11th through 12th graders taking this course. But I don't want to say that with any type of finality because it could change and people could make some different decisions.
And then just at one building?
So it would be at City and West. I would say that we've had more conversations with City West. We just kind of recently talked to them about it, and they seemed open to it, but it hasn't been as worked through that particular piece. So they're on board. I talked to Greg already, and they're on board. It's just we had more of a conversation at City, just kind of where it flowed from.
And why just City and West?
Because the only reason is because Dr. Covington is only one person. And so we thought about looking at City West and Liberty, but unfortunately it just won't work with Dr. Covington's schedule because she's very accomplished and she's be taking classes right now. She's gracefully gracious with her presence because she's been grading papers all day today. And so that's the only reason why we didn't do it for all three. We can only work it into where.
For all four? Is it not an option at Tate?
Oh yeah,
Well-
Tate either. Just because of the two.
Okay.
Tate students could take it at City, I'm assuming.
They could. Yeah. So yeah.
So really, we're offering it at 3.
Right.
And-
And because that's where sorry to cut you off, that's where the main interest has flowed from.
Okay.
And the cost on this is relative to option 2.
At this point, with it being kind of a pilot, I guess the costs could be less than that.
Okay.
Um,
And this Global Studies Certification option 4, is that still available to students?
We do
should
not
get
have
the-
it available in our district yet.
Okay.
It would be something that we could begin to
down the road.
explore if we wanted to.
We have had some teachers across different disciplines
Yep.
attend the sort of training and informational sessions that they've had at UI, but we haven't solidified it beyond
Okay.
that. So,
What's the discussion around that, or the process, or the?
I think one thing with that Global Studies Certificate, they approached us last year when we were having this conversation, just not because of that conversation necessarily, it just kind of timed up that they're getting this off the ground and going as well. So it's, like you can see there's not many states that have participated,
Right.
so it's relatively new to get going. So I think if that's something we want to continue to pursue, we just need to continue to engage with the university and talk about how we line that up. Like Brady said, there's a component that we need to have teachers go through some of that training as well. And then you can tell there's some steps there to align that into our system as well, as far as how do we provide those experiences for kids if we want them walking out with that certificate to do that.
Is there a downside to that? I mean, obviously the work, and is it going to take away from anything else that we're already doing?
I guess one just other caution, I know our world language teachers are also exploring a bilingual certification that they would like to bring before the board here as well. And that would have some of these similar components that students would get a bilingual certificate when they graduate based on service and based on their ability to demonstrate literacy in 2 languages. So
The
I could
AP
see that being a little bit of a,
the AP Capstone program
And then
at
there's that
City,
too.
and then
Yep.
it'll start up at West.
Thank
Same
you
has a
for-
service component to it as well, which is sort of a competing initiative, I guess.
Okay.
So in the spirit of sort of the long-term progression that we're on for this pilot in this third trimester, what key questions are we going to be looking to answer throughout the pilot so that we can make a good decision as a district on whether we're going to make this course available long-term for, at all 4 of our high schools? I mean, so what are the key questions that we need to answer? Because this is a great opportunity to learn, also have our students participate in the program, but how do we make this ongoing? Or help us decide whether we want to make this ongoing?
Who wants me how did it go? Yeah, that's the first question. We're talking with other students, talking with Dr. Covington, talking with the teacher director, talking with multiple people throughout the building to see how it went. I think that the other question is I have some concerns about the barrier piece. I mean, even within those two high schools, as far as whether because where we're doing it at, whether or not people are going to be interested. Is it something that we need to try again for the next year, where there's more plan preparation behind the summer, where people have the opportunity to look at it more? I'm very hopeful based on the concerns that have been expressed at the board table that we'll have interested students, but I also want to see how that translates to people actually taking the class and at the time that we can only offer it. So there's some issues that we have to work through, but those are the two major concerns that I have. Just the barrier conversation, and then just in general, how's it going?
Yeah, I think about three big things, right? The enrollment that Kingsley's talking about. How do we know if we have enough reach? And I'm going to come back to that same one as my third one a little bit. But what's the enrollment we did get? What's that data point? The second one would be the student experience in it. Knowing from the comments we've heard from the students, is the experience from the course matching the concerns and the comments we've heard there? Is that lining up? And then the third one is really the ultimate reach of it. So yes, we might have started with an enrollment of students, but we've also heard the need, for that reach to expand a little bit. And so, that's still going to be a challenge no matter what, as it's always offered as an elective, is that, some kids are going to choose to take it, but, in a way, kids take good electives, right? They sign up for the classes that they find value in. And so, measuring the success of that and then trying to expand the reach that way, I think will be important too, that it's not just students that are already passionate about this, but that there's also kind of a word of mouth component, because that's how our electives are really driven, is that kids talk to their kids about you should be in that course, right? And so those would be three things I would think about right away.
I guess I would look at it as, I appreciate the urgency that I feel that is behind this now, to try and get it ready for the third trimester and not trying to wait for the perfect time and, when you really got all this, just trying to get it out there, because I think the sooner that we have something to start from, the sooner we can start to expand it and learn from it and really increase it. And I think, the answer to all those questions that you're asking is important, but I think it's got to build some momentum before you really know what you've got on your hands. And I think just getting it out there quick to have something is a good thing, even though it's not perfect and not everybody's going to be able to drop something third trimester and take it, but some people will. And I like the fact that we're not waiting on it anymore. We've been waiting on it for a while, but we're not waiting anymore, and I appreciate that.
Well, and this probably isn't the best time to bring this up, but one of the things I think we need to add to the discussion at some point in time is, with a 7-period day, how difficult it is to have electives. And I think we should have a discussion on possibly an 8 or a 9-period day at some point in time. Because, when you try to knock out your graduation requirements and everything like that, and you're active in sports and those types of things, and if you have more periods in the day, is that going to help us with electives? Is it going to help us with the career and ed tech type programming and those things? And I just think at some point in time we have to have that discussion.
And then one thing to think about too is scalability. So at what point can we get this at Liberty and take? Assuming everything goes well, because I'm assuming you're not going to be around forever to keep teaching the course.
I don't know. It depends.
That would be great. And then how much can you, could you get other folks on board to be able to scale it out?
Yeah, one of the things that I was talking with Kingsley and Diane about was that I am working with the African American Studies Department currently and other departments to see about getting undergraduate students course credit in order to intern with me as teaching assistants. So that way it's like, especially those that want to be teachers and are already on that pipeline. So it's really just creating cooperative leadership amongst undergraduate students. So that way it's not just me, right? It's if I'm at a conference or something, I know that I have 3 students that will be at 2 different high schools, right? So that's part of the challenge that I wanted to address too, because I, heaven forbid I get sick or in a conference, right? So I think providing training for those students as well in January leading up to that February timeframe is what I'm hoping for.
That's great.
Other comments or questions? I can't wait to see how it goes this spring. I mean, really, to see the results of the pilot is super exciting.
I wish I could take it.
I know.
One of the things that the college students did, I think I'm going to scale it down and have the high school students possibly work in pairs or individually on their projects. And so some of the projects that took place in the past, students investigated the colleges or the schools' Title IX policies and if those were effective or not, and they found that they were not. So uncovering those things, doing reproductive justice workshops in the dorms, right, being trained by the health centers, creating children's books that are not following kind of gendered guidelines, right, that we're kind of used to. So, and reading those at local preschools, right? So those are some of the things. One group did a documentary, which was on women's body image, right? So there are a lot of ways for students to be successful because they're able to pick their own trajectory. And so every week, well, each day that I'm at the school, and even not at the school, right, they can tweet me, they can update their WordPress account, because all students will have will use WordPress in order to kind of update to show like what's going on with their classes. And then at the end of the trimester, probably right around graduation time, I'm thinking will be the conclusion of the class, because I'm anticipating so many seniors. And that will be the time that we'll do an exhibition. So all of you would be welcome to come, and the students would share, you know, what they've developed, challenges that they've had, and, you know, things of that nature. So really just tying in a lot of the literature that you probably didn't read, but just tying in the fact that, you know, ethnic studies really has a long history of empowering students of color, because it's really not coming from a perspective of oppression, right? Slavery was not how African Americans' history started, right? So, for example, so those are some of the things. So starting with an empowerment model as opposed to a deficit lens is really where we're working from. And I think that a lot of times you see, you know, students, their self-esteem goes up, confidence goes up, grades go up, right? The achievement gap is closing because they're able to connect with the content of the curriculum, right? Because they'll also be part of creating it. Even though I have that reading list, I want students to come and say, okay, yeah, let's read this, let's not do that, right? Or I'm interested in this, can we go here? So it's really going to be, what I've given you all is kind of a guide map for where I'd like to go, but the students will really be driving the car.
So we're gonna keep up with the infusion model. That's going up, despite some of the challenges that you were describing. We'll get this pilot in place for the spring, and we'll, I'm sure, have an update probably during, but definitely I'd love for us to be able to participate in the exhibits as you were talking about, and hear about the results of the pilot to see what we learned and how we can keep this moving forward. Are there anything else? Are there any other items on sort of our longer term planning that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, so the other piece of this is our multicultural and gender fair piece. You know, I talked about that briefly, where we're really trying to, you know, work with our teachers to develop a curriculum that, you know, again, I think maybe I didn't share. Okay, so I need to share that information with you again. It's just a copy, it's somewhat confusing without the context, but it's really focused on ensuring that, looking at the curricular connection within our curriculum, and, you know, providing additional resource or replacement resource to ensure that, you know, we have the opportunities. One of the things that I think our teachers in general talk about is the STAR, or the lack of resources. So there's a lack of resources around LGBT discussion or gender inclusive discussion at the kindergarten level. So we'll provide that lesson plan within this curriculum that teachers have worked on to do that. Some of this work is already occurring. Some of our teachers attend the Diversity Day at the university. Dr. Jason Harshman, who's the chair of the Diversity Committee at the College of Education, he's done some of that work already. You can see that on our website. We can just pull lesson plans from there. So ultimately, that's the bill. I mean, hopefully, in like a year time or a year and a half time, you know, it's less of providing resources and more what I would like to do is being in the classroom, seeing how it's actually been taught, engaging with the students, engaging with the teachers, you know, some of that success work that you can't do behind the desk.
Fantastic.
guess the other question I would have, Matt, maybe you can weigh in on this. Do we wait until the pilot's finished to determine if we're going to offer this for next year and then try to enroll kids who've already completed a schedule? Or do we offer it, I guess, in January when they're signing up and see what the interest is and plan on offering something regardless? Or have it, or maybe have to pull back?
By the time we get done with the
Right.
spring, it's too late.
Yeah, I think we would just need to, I think we should just probably include it now.
Okay.
You know, I think whatever the experience is in, you know, the third trimester, I'm assuming it's gonna go great and that's gonna be
Right.
done very well, you know, from all the stuff I've heard from you guys. But I think in either way, we will be doing something, you know, with that course next year. So
Okay.
I think we just will plan for it and put that in there and have kids sign up for it now. And that could be another, you know, success indicator for us too, to look
Sure.
at what next year's
Yeah.
enrollments look like. And, you know, obviously kids change schedules too, right? So the more they hear about it, they continue to go into the guidance office and ask for that class for next year as it continues their track too. So I think we just will plan for it.
Okay, thanks.
Being super optimistic, are you gonna cap enrollment?
Yeah, 30 kids.
30?
30 at each high school for this trimester, right. But for next year, if we had a lot of interest, we could open that up further.
I've taught it with 50 undergraduate students who are right out of high school. So that's how it's been done in the past. So I think the 30 is pretty comfortable.
One thing when we usually discuss issues with students against age discrimination, they're usually at the table. So I know they're in the audience. I don't know if they wanted to comment, if they had anything to say.
Please.
Do you guys have anything?
Yeah, sure. Would you all like us to send you?
Just speak up.
Yeah.
Actually,
Taking notes.
Kim didn't need to come forward.
They'd probably pick up on the recorder better if they would.
So far, I'm hearing a lot of good discussion about when to start this course, about what's going on in the course. I think that you all are really taking care to meet what we've asked for about focusing on histories of empowerment rather than histories of oppression. I think that the project and discussion-based aspects are really good ideas, and although it's not a required course, I mean, it is a pilot, so that is the start. I would really like to hit on the fact that keeping in mind long-term that this course should be at least thought of as becoming required in the near future just because of its importance. And I know that, as has been said, there's only one person in the status quo, but in the future, it does need to be a required course. This is something that everyone can benefit from, and I'm so glad it's being put on the table now. I'm not sure what else other people have to say, but from what I've heard so far, it sounds pretty good. Did you all have questions for me at all? Did you?
Just want to, get your feedback.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I got here like 5 minutes ago from work, so I really don't know what happened, but are we like on board with the idea, or
We're going to pilot, so Dr. Covington is going to pilot a course third trimester.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be offered at City and West,
Mm-hmm.
at City High, West High 4th hour, and City High at the end of the day.
Yeah, we're looking at City High.
4th hour. City High
City
fourth.
High 4th. So yeah, so it's going to happen, and we're going to pilot it, and Dr. Covington has taught this at the college level. So this is trying to get it, just appropriate for the audience that's going to be there. And see how it goes, and it looks like we're going to have that on the schedule for next year as well, so people can sign up. And so we've got, for sure, a 2-year pilot, right, that we're going to see how this goes. And it looks, we've seen the syllabus in our board packet, and it's, oh, you guys can see it too.
Yeah.
Great. Looks like a pretty exciting syllabus from kind of my lens. And I love this, again, the focusing on kind of strengths and not looking at the deficit model. I just think those lenses are really important at the front end of this to guide where we're headed. It sounds exciting.
And then going back to the idea of putting it on as a course offering for next year for students to look at now, I think that's definitely a good idea because it allows people more time to plan, whether or not they'll be able to fit it into their schedule. That'll definitely help the turnout for one thing, and it will make sure that the people who are signing up for it won't be instantly dropping it because, oops, I forgot to take that one class that I need in order to graduate. Like, I would definitely encourage offering it this year.
Are we talking about like on the piece of paper
For the
where we
schedule,
get to
for
sign
next year
up?
registration,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So I'm curious, what are your thoughts? I'm just thinking of my own son's schedule and how most of his classes are year-long classes. What are your thoughts about how kids will fit this in yet this year? And if you're going to get the folks that you're looking for to take the class, or how do you think that'll work?
So, speaking from my viewpoint, I know that I have 5 constant year-long courses, but that leaves me with 2 periods for electives every trimester, and I think almost everyone has at least 1 open per school year that they can fill with an elective of their choice, and most people just choose to fill those with like all arts or like a foods class,
study hall.
but yeah, or even a study hall. I forgot that was even oops, but I think that if they can take time off for a foods class that will teach them how to make cookies, they can fit this into their schedule as well.
I might suggest that you do some sort of promotion of it, to like if it comes from the students.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be more likely for students to drop that easy foods class, you know, for something that's going to require a little bit more work but has so much benefit to them if they can kind of hear that from your perspective.
I'm actually working on an article for the school paper right now, which is why I'm taking lots of notes, but
Or do you guys have like West High or City High Weekly or something like that?
yeah, we also
Those
have
videos?
a weekly newsletter, so I'm going to be talking to Mr. Bacon about some other promotion we could be doing, maybe putting in announcements, encouraging people to sign up, which is what we've done in the past when we offered a dance class and a music elective for the next trimester. When we brought the fashion course to City High, they didn't start talking about it until a little after midterm second trimester, and it still had a pretty good turnout because there were a lot of people that had opens and wanted to try something new, and I think it'll be something similar in this situation.
And then I'm interested in Mitch and Brady from your social studies perspective. What are your thoughts?
But as a curricular, I love it. I mean, I was just thinking, what period is it going to be at West?
6th.
Oh, I was thinking you'd be going from my class to this one, so that'd be good. Double dose. But the, I mean, I definitely think there's these aspects in the curriculum that's not getting out there. And so that's a, but I guess I'm more worried about, and I don't think there's anything you do about just having a 1 period option. That's what I thought we were going to do before school, and I get the barriers part. But I was also thinking with an 8:50 start, and maybe it doesn't work with your schedule too. I have to come in. I'm not sure, but I was thinking, gosh, that nobody has a class, or there's very few people in a class there. So could more kids have it as an option? Because probably the other voice we want to hear is the guidance office. Because I'm thinking, oh gosh, we have all these schedule requests and changes and that could be a little bit of a mayhem model too.
And we did talk to them briefly on school's guidance and the city high's guidance. So it's a pilot and it's work.
Right.
It's like the details still have to get worked out from that standpoint. So your concerns are super valid from that standpoint. Yeah.
But currently, I would hope we can chit chat and try to dovetail and try to get things. Make sure, guys, if there's a unit you're doing and there's things that's APO's history, I can make sure I'm covering, or from an alternative perspective or this or that. And Brady, maybe Phil, you have a same spot.
It's a great addition to our curriculum. It is. It's a great partnership too.
I wanted to also say, as far as this particular course, it's been taught in different departments, right? So I've taught it from African American Studies and Ethnic Studies perspective. I taught it in Women's Studies, right? My master's is in Women and Gender Studies, so really heavily focusing on making sure that there are different elements. And so I've broken it up into 4 potential courses that's on the first page of the handout that you have. So I'll read them real quick. So it's the one that we're thinking about, exploring social justice through ethnic studies, exploring social justice through women's studies, media and social justice, and advanced ethnic studies, right? So it's really set up for students to take them sequentially if possible, or just as a sequence, right? So that way they have a focus once they graduate, right? Potentially.
Any other comments or questions? I think this is exciting. Thank you, Dr. Covington, for coming and giving your expertise and perspective, and thank you for coming, students, and making us aware of your reaction to this proposal. I think we've got some work ahead of us, but it feels like we're moving in a positive direction, and hopefully responding to the needs that you have so eloquently expressed to us.
So can I clarify something?
Yes.
Is it a yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to be clear.
Yeah. There's a class this third trimester. We're putting it on the schedule
Okay.
for next year for students to be able to enroll in. So I think it's a yes. We have lots to learn, and then details to flesh out, and those key questions that we talked about needing to make sure that we answer throughout the pilot process. But definitely, we're moving forward with this class this
How
trimester.
soon will we be able to sign up for it, the third try?
We'll have to go back and work with the building principals, and they'll communicate to you guys, through, I think like Mary was talking about, with some of the communication channels and networks. And so,
They'll contact us.
yeah, as soon as we know this decision, we can go back tomorrow and start communicating with them. And so my guess would be sometime in that January timeframe with course registration.
I think as you talk about the publicity of it all, and we've talked about the cap to the number of students that are taking this year, and the fact that we're wanting to do it next year and are going to do it, that could be part of the publicity. Say, hey, we want to see a lot of interest now. We want to max out those classes to help ensure that it's going to keep on going next year. So all of you that, we went way over the max, that you got another shot at it next year, and really I don't want people to feel, well, I missed my shot at it, and then they're defeated from it, right? Like, I want it to have that momentum and really carry on all the way through next year. I think that's a good way to do it, is say, all right, we're going to do it past this year. We've got a lot of space for people to get.
Yeah, you may just have to prioritize this spring. If you have more than 30, you probably prioritize your seniors to make sure that they, since it's their last shot at it. And we do that with other classes too. And just say, gosh, we can offer 2 and we've got 80 kids, so 10 of you are going to take something else. So there's ways to do that.
Good. Thank you. Thank you all. Good conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do you all have any other questions or comments directed towards us, things we should keep in mind from here on out?
Just get the word out.
Okay.
Make sure people are taking this class, and then take the class.
And then your feedback
And
from
keep-
taking the
yes,
class.
Absolutely. I don't know how it goes.
Yeah.
So you all will be, since you're going to be in the class, you're going to be grading each other. So keeping that, this is really going to be a very non-traditional class. So also just keeping an open mind that it is not going to be memorized stuff. It's not the banking method of education, right? You're not going to be, even though it's important for us to memorize things and to remember certain historical pieces, it's going to be really important for you all to be engaged with each other to discuss the stuff that we're reading, especially since it's pass-fail. That's one thing that I was worried about. Will students read, the autobiography of Malcolm X, the first chapter, right? Or whatever we have on the syllabus. So just kind of being mindful that it's really going to be guided by you all's engagement and discussion.
Discussion-based and stuff like that.
Yeah, discussion-based and project-based.
I actually think that might up participation, just knowing that you don't have that stress of, I have to get this done by tomorrow for this grade, and rather engaging with the curriculum because that's what you want to do. That's definitely a more positive interaction with just the course material as a whole. Anything else?
Okay. Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of your input tonight. Very helpful.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Sounds like that. We'll move to the next topic, which is the CASTLE program, and Michelle leading that.
Sure.
Sorry,
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for letting us present. We are really excited to share this with you. I have my team here, and I'm actually going to turn it over mostly to them to let you share, and then we'll be open for questions afterwards. But I have the 3 teachers right now who are teaching. So if you don't know, CASEL is our cross-curricular program that we are piloting this year for 7th grade. It's going really well. They're going to explain a little bit more about that. Our hope is to expand it next year. We're currently talking through the plans for how we can grow this program next year. We had so much interest in it that we do want to open it up for more 7th graders and then also offer it as an opportunity for 8th grade. So currently I have our 7th grade team here and then our instructional coach who was pretty instrumental in helping this get off the ground. So I will actually just let them introduce themselves and then get going, and then we'll just answer any questions that you have.
Okay, excuse me, my name is Mike Keller-Wilson. I teach the language arts, 7th grade language arts portion of the CASEL program.
I'm Scott Stimmel. I'm a science trifecta.
Michelle Kopecki, Global Studies. And Kelsey Salter, just instructional strategist.
Well, and before we get started, just thank you for having us. It was really interesting hearing some of the previous conversation too. So, we're going to get started just very briefly with talking about why we're doing this and trying to keep that in mind as we sort of approach what we do. I think one of the biggest ideas we had going into this, and one of the biggest takeaways after having done it for a little while, is just seeing how much you can increase student engagement by having them look at what they're doing through multiple disciplines and keeping in mind the connections between classes. So that's been just, I think, an incredibly effective part of the CASEL program. And I think there are a lot of amazing initiatives going on throughout Southeast. And I think part of that speaks to the second point, that there is such a large and such a diverse student population here at Southeast. And we really want to make sure that we have options available to meet the needs of all learners. And we've really tried to focus on the idea that this CASEL program is not a gifted program, it's not a remedial program, and that it's just another option for students, and one that we found is a really effective way for students to learn and engage with what they're learning. And then just as far as the flexibility is concerned, I know my two colleagues and I have had to be pretty flexible, but I think the ability of having a larger block of time has allowed us to do some really unique things and really try a lot of variety in what we're doing, and part of that has been really effective in interesting students as well. So I just think that key idea of being able to be more flexible to the needs of students is always really effective. And then, as I said before, just meeting the needs of all of our students and helping them see kind of those different connections has been really, really helpful.
So I'm going to just talk a little bit about what is different and what is similar. One of the differences is that we have a longer, more flexible block of time. The 3 of us, we basically, it blocks off the first 3 periods of the day. So when they're in CASEL, they're in there for a 3-period extended block, and during that time we have the ability on some days to have them move through the different classes. On other days when we have CASEL days, they can be working on their projects that entire time. We could be doing blended activities with them for part of the time, and then have a whole group thing later. It just kind of depends on what we want to do. The flexibility of that time, though, also allows us the opportunity to leave the school more easily if we want to. One of the things that we did earlier this year, we took them on a trip to Pear Deck to try to infuse more community connections, to let them see more what's available in our own community, just around them. And we've talked about that as being very integral in being able to create those community connections. It gives us more time to do that. Even looking forward to our poverty and hunger project, the opportunity may be to try to get more community outreach, to let the kids know what is available outside our school. Another thing that's a little bit different is this idea of cross-curricular projects, and I know Mike will talk in a few minutes about an example of a project, but the idea that we're going to infuse and look at the standards for our classes and get kids doing projects that are more standards-based, so that when we grade them, because they will have a grade for all of us, but to be able to demonstrate understanding of the standards within these projects. Another thing that is different is this idea of shared teachers, and that has been a really big plus for us. The idea that those kids are going to have all of us together and we really get to know our kids really well. Not only has it helped in regards to our ability to collaborate on instruction, but it's been great for our ability to collaborate on our students and student needs and what they most need. As far as the similarities go, it's an option. Castle's population should be a representation of our student population. That should be no different. They'll continue to receive grades in language arts, in science, and in global studies. We do things that are separate from each other, and then we use standards in those projects, in the project grading, to allow each of us to have our own component of what we expect out of those projects. The class size is similar. Standards learning objectives as far as what they're going to learn in global studies, standards they'll meet in global studies, science, and language arts the same, and then all of their classes outside of that Castle time would be just like anybody else. As soon as they leave that block of time, they're traveling around the school taking the same classes anybody else would.
So I'll kind of talk us through a little bit of this. This is our example. Ooh, I don't know, maybe it's not smart. Alright, I've got a dumb board in order. So one of the I think really the first academic unit that we did with our Castle students this year was Water is Life project. So we did a number of different things. We read a book, A Long Walk to Water, with students, and so we had them do a little bit of a dive into issues with access to clean water and things like that that come up in that book. In my classes, we focused a little bit more on the aspects of reading it and supporting some of your ideas with evidence and things like that that I would normally do with other sort of fiction texts. And then I'll kind of give Scott and Michelle a chance to talk a little bit later about the things that they focused on in their classes. But ultimately, when we reached the end of the unit, we had students work in groups to create some sort of product about an issue relating to resource scarcity in the world. So they could choose water, but there were a bunch of different other options they could have picked too. And so they had some creative options, some different things. Making a game show was an option, or making a news broadcast was another option. And I think they could also do like an individual online flyer. And so really, we didn't so much grade them on the product that they created as we did using this evidence of learning document that each student filled out individually. And so this had it broken down into the different standards. So these are the language arts standards. And students would, first of all, link to the products that they created, and that could be things like their notes or things like their broadcast or things like the script that they created for whatever it was. And then really where they're demonstrating what they got out of the assignment is where they're justifying whether they've met that standard or not. And so having them kind of engage with these actual standards and figure out have they mastered it and how can they kind of demonstrate evidence of their mastery. So that by itself I think was really, really fascinating to try. But in addition, having them use kind of the same project to justify not just these language arts standards, but also, also the things like global study standards. And yeah, it was good. We'll sync up. We're pretty on key here. But also things like technology literacy standards and just other things that wouldn't necessarily be a focus of my curriculum in the past. And then I think another piece of this that was incredibly interesting and exciting to see was just our ability to kind of pull what came up and meet students' needs as they arose. So like just off the cuff, seeing students struggling with a certain standard or struggling with the language arts standards in general, I could have the flexibility to just announce to 4 or 3 classes of students, I'm going to do a quick mini lesson on the language arts standards because I noticed that we're struggling. If you feel like that fits with your experience, then come and join me in my room. And I just had standing room only in my room for 10 minutes or so, and we did a quick question and answer session about those standards, and they went back into their groups and kind of kept working from there. So it's been a really exciting experience from my perspective, just seeing how students respond when they're offered this sort of opportunity. And yeah, I think the other things that we've continued to do since this project and kind of the plans we have for revisiting it next year and some of the changes that we're planning on making, even as we just go further into the year this year, are pretty exciting, and I'm really looking forward to it. I don't know, anything to add?
I think the only thing is, you talk about reading the book. One of the things we were able to do is bring in the people from Wells for Wellness to speak to the kids. You know what I mean? And so it left more opportunity for guest speakers. I mean, there were other things we were able to do with that flexible block of time that we might not have otherwise done. It made it a lot easier to make the connections, the ties between our disciplines, to be able to do that literacy component, to be able to bring in the real world speaker to talk about their work in digging wells and all that, but it also connected it to the book as well, and they were able to talk about this is the red giraffe they're talking about. I mean, this is what it was like going in to create to help people and all that. So I thought that part was really great and something we haven't had the flexibility to do before.
One thing that we did learn from this was that kind of the first draft going through this evidence of learning document was we noticed that a lot of our students that we kind of viewed as really strong students, like straight A students, were giving us evidence of stuff that wasn't A work. It wasn't, and we kind of thought about it and we were like, that's because this is totally different. That's because this is totally different than what they have learned. If they've learned to do school and to follow the steps and the procedure, this was challenging for them. It was really difficult for them to kind of take ownership into their hands, come up with something that they can prove to us that they are meeting this. And it gave us some awareness, like we need to scaffold. We need to really model things and show our expectations, but it was hard. It was definitely hard for kids who have excelled in school on a traditional model.
This was our first big project, and so we really tried to mold and guide a little bit more. In other words, we gave options of what, some ideas of what you could do. Ultimately, our goal is to loosen the reins all the time, getting them taking more ownership of their learning. That was our first project. Our second project was global issues. Our third project is disease, coming up in January, and then our poverty project is the one where we're hoping they will take the most ownership of that project and really make the decisions about where they want to go with that and how they want to demonstrate their understanding of what we're doing.
Yeah, well, and before we even move on, I would add that even something like the global issues essay that's done across the district in 7th grade, just having this program attached to that has made just an incredible difference. This year it was just Ms. Kopecki and I working on it, and Scott had some other things that he had to do for his science curriculum. But even just as a language arts teacher, having this sort of authentic writing assignment that they normally do in global studies, and being able to focus on the writing aspects of that that normally they wouldn't necessarily have time for was just an awesome way of doing it. And I think the quality of work and the
quality of the work was unimaginably different.
The understanding that I'm seeing in students and the level of depth of understanding, I think, has increased a lot because they're hearing it from multiple teachers, and I'm able to focus in on some details that I probably would not have had time for otherwise. So I think it's been really helpful, and being able to defer to kind of an expert in the field and have access to that, I think just makes an incredible amount of difference. So, yeah.
All right, so over the course of this year, we've kind of identified some opportunities and challenges that have come from this. We definitely have a really strong community of students, like having a cohort of 90 students that are kind of with each other throughout the beginning of the day really strengthens their bonds with one another, and I think is a good bridge kind of going from an elementary setting into a secondary setting. We know our kids much better because of that. When we talk about our student needs and how to respond to them, the three of us, I feel like I know my students more, their needs, based on things that Kopecky has seen. And so we get together and we talk, and that teacher collaboration has increased. I feel like I've prided myself on being like a collaborative person, and you know, some of the strongest things I've done as a teacher have come through collaboration. You know, we meet together 2 or 3 times a week. We eat and meet during our lunch, and so, but that has led to increased understanding of our student needs, what they respond to, how to you know, pick kids up when they're having a bad day. You know, if a student comes in with their head down from first period to second period in a traditional class, I might not know what set them off or why they're upset. Whereas Kopecky can just come over and say, hey, this is what happened first period, this is what, you know, they came in with. We're right next door. We're really connected with our kids that way. So we've been, so doing things with the cross-curricular, I think really helps kids see the connectiveness of issues and kind of this idea of holistic understanding of topics, how you can apply learnings from different curriculum throughout their whole lives. And that's something that we kind of focus on, is that everything's connected. It's not just like you're here to do science during this chunk of the day. I want you to do that throughout your whole life. You're not just going to take lessons you learn in global studies for this one chunk of time. We want you to try to think of it from that lens throughout your whole life. So that's something that we focus on. In terms of other collaboration, you know, we're meeting together quite a bit. I know that we, the three of us, have done increased PD, going to blended learning conferences up at Grantwood, designing lessons up there. I know that I've probably worked harder this year than I have any other year other than year one as a teacher. But it's meaningful work, and it's work that we are invested in and that we believe in. And so, yeah, that's a good thing. The flexibility in scheduling, they mentioned that. We've been able to do some cool things with guest speakers and field trips. And the other thing that has been an unintended consequence is when one of us is gone, we can adjust the lesson so that, like for instance, if Kopecky's gone for a day, she was out with a sick kid the other day, instead of having a sub for global studies, we just doubled down on science and language arts that day. And so it was a more meaningful day for those students instead of spending a chunk of time with the sub. Challenges that come from this are scheduling, how to get a cohort or cohorts of students blocked together, and then, you know, thinking about other specials like band and foreign language and things that might be offered only at certain times. How do we make it jive all together? It totally requires a strong teacher team, people who drink the collaborative culture Kool-Aid, and people who are willing to, you know, work together, but you know, modeling that from the teacher perspective, and then that's what we expect our kids to do, I think has been a good thing. It's a lot of work. I wouldn't sugarcoat it to a teacher. It's more work than we've done when you have to redesign curriculum, redesign lesson, redesign projects from multiple lenses. But like I mentioned earlier, it's empowering. It's empowering to have that freedom as a teacher to design what you're doing in the classroom, and it's meaningful work. So it's a lot, but it's good. The other challenges are, you know, kind of thinking about, like, if you have a traditional model and you have this castle model, how do you maintain fidelity with covering all the stuff? You know, covering all the units, covering all the standards that you are traditionally doing or have traditionally done. And then making it work with PLCs, making it work where I still meet with the other science teachers, the other 7th grade science teachers, and how do we, what are the goals that we focus on?
Formative assessments and trying to be able to look at, how kids are doing if you're in a different place than perhaps the other teachers.
That's been just a challenge.
So, yeah, like you said, like this year, right now we have one group of 7th graders. We're hoping to expand to another group of 7th graders and have a group of 8th graders.
And I would say they're not taking nearly enough credit, but this team has been, just huge in making this be successful. Like, this was not born out of, nobody taught them how to do this. This was just truly a lot of vision and leadership, and this team just saying, I think we can do this. It was applying for a grant. It was going and observing it in some other districts and researching that, and then spending countless hours of their own time saying this is what we can do and this is what we feel we need to do based on what we're seeing in our students. And it wasn't just the struggling students that led us to believe we need something different. It's also those kids that, like Scott said, that we know are doing school but are just not tapping their potential. We're not getting out of them what we know they can. We know they're not engaged. And so it really was a personal desire, I guess, in this building and then this team to take on a lot of extra work. And so I just can't thank them enough for everything that they have put into making this successful. The feedback that we have gotten from both students and parents is, it's amazing. They love it. The students love it. The parents love it. They are eager for more. We are hearing lots and lots from our elementaries already about, how can I make sure I'm in the program next year? And that's our biggest challenge right now is we've opened it. We did a lottery system last year. We were pretty late in the game, which I would say is also a huge credit to our team, because when we started thinking about this, and I will definitely thank the district because Matt really brought this idea to our secondary team and said there's a school in Cedar Rapids doing this, opened it up to all the junior highs to go and observe. We went and immediately liked what we saw and started planning the next day. And said, how can we make this happen by next school year, which was a really tight time frame. So that did impact, I think, a little bit of our ability to truly advertise to our 6th grade. So what we did is we opened it up and said we have 90 spots. We sort of rationed it by your elementary school gives us this percentage of our incoming 7th graders, so you have this many spots in the Castle program. But we were a little bit late in the game as far as getting the word out. So a lot of it was just through email from those 6th grade teachers, which we know doesn't reach everybody. We had a parent night. We asked 6th grade teachers to work with us there, but we feel much more confident for next year because we have a lot of materials ready for when we go out and do our 6th grade registration talks. So we'll be able to present to all of the 6th graders about this. We'll be able to get this into more parents' hands a lot sooner to make sure that we truly are getting a representative sample.
Well, and people know about it now.
People know about it.
So, that makes a huge difference too. Guidance counselors and teachers at the 6th grade level know more about it now. So before, where it's like, well, would you recommend it? I don't know. I've never seen it. Now they can say, well, this has been the feedback I've heard, and I think maybe this would be a good fit for your child. I think they could give a more accurate assessment of whether or not this would be a good fit.
So when would it not be a good fit? Because I've heard quality is unimaginably different. I've heard there's greater connection between teachers and students, where engagement is better. Why would this not be good for every student?
We've talked actually a lot about that, and I think from our perspective as an educator, we keep thinking this would be great for everybody. We have had some parents who have said this would not be a good fit for my child, partly because maybe they don't work as well collaboratively or they need a lot more structure and guidance. I think our argument would be maybe this is why they need this program even more. But we have had some parents say that their kid does much better by knowing what to expect. If they have a lot of uncertainties, anxiety, you don't know a lot about what you're going to expect. You're kind of going to go out there and it's not the same thing every day. It's not routine. Again, I think the education part of us would say this might be a really good opportunity for that. I don't think we have all parents on board with we would want our child in this no matter what, but going into it, we weren't really sure who this would be a good fit for. I think what we talked about now is we're leaning more towards we think this is really great for everybody.
And so my second question is sort of what kind of evidence, because obviously you're getting a lot of qualitative
Yeah.
feedback, we love it, love it, love it, but do you have, as in grades, is there other kind of surveys that you're taking? I mean, how are you
Yep.
improving efficacy of the program?
And that's been the difficult piece, because we can certainly look at grades and we can certainly look at Iowa assessments, but one thing that we are very transparent about is that in spite of our best efforts to get a truly representative sample in Castle, it's not. And so if we simply compared Iowa assessment scores of Castle kids with the rest of the kids, that wouldn't necessarily be an indicator that it was Castle that was making a difference. So that is one of the things that we're talking about for next year, is how can we, if it's truly representative, then we're looking more at comparing apples to apples. If we look at standardized tests, or we look at the common formative assessments that our PLCs are doing, I think that's one piece that we can look at. So if Global Studies is offering common formative assessments, how did the Castle Global Studies kids do versus the kids who are not in the Castle program? And I think that will tell us a lot in some more real-time data. But we're also pretty clear on...
And we're giving our engagement surveys to our students, and we've tried to differentiate with my engagement survey with my morning kids versus my afternoon kids, and compare what am I seeing in my own teaching every day, what am I seeing in engagement between my morning kids and my afternoon kids. We can also reflect on students that we have that perhaps are thriving more in the morning than they are in the afternoons. Okay? And so we have some of that to look at and say, for a student who's a struggling learner, we're seeing lights out in that safe. I don't know if it's safer, but certainly gotten to know each other better. Kind of almost reminds you a little bit of elementary school, right? Where you're together and you spend a big chunk of time with a group of people, and you feel safe talking in front of them because you know them. I mean, you're with them all the time. Versus maybe a student who might have Kelsey in the afternoon, where they're really struggling because they don't necessarily have that. And we've seen a lot of benefits with the students.
If I could interject, which is a couple of different observations from my role. One, I actually just met with the team this week about doing just like a Castle survey with students about a lot of the student engagement, or the student survey, what was that? The student climate survey questions that we do every year, trying to just have like our Castle kids really reflect on the feeling that they have in the morning versus the feeling they have in the afternoon, and try to see if they can articulate a little bit to us about that. And the unique position about my job is I get to work with wonderful teachers in the morning, but in the afternoon I'm a teacher myself for my Literacy 7 class, and there are a couple of students in particular that when I go out and I work in their classrooms with the Castle program, I am like, who are you? Can I please have this like type of focus, this type of energy in my room? And when I talk to them about it, they're like, yeah, I'll give it a go. And they come to my class and they're like, literally crawling on the ground, like hiding under the table. And when I talk to them about it, essentially like all that I've been able to get out of them is that when this person has attendance issues and when they don't feel like they understand or they feel like they've missed too much, they shut down and they decide that they can't learn this, they're too far behind, so I'm not even going to try. When they are out there, they feel like they have 3 teachers at once that are with them, and they know that for the next 3 class periods they have the same group of people working to get them caught up, versus you have 40 minutes with me real quick, I'm trying to get these kids going, okay, let's talk about what you missed, and like trying to make that work. And it's just like, it's that safety feeling that people are there to like, really help and support them.
Are you looking at attendance data?
Yeah, we've looked at attendance data and referral data, and again, all of that.
Those would be your data points.
Yep, and they are. Like I said, we just know that we're really not comparing apples to apples. And so those are really important things when we look at getting a, and when I say that, I just mean that a lot of our, like if we look at attendance data, sometimes that's our at-risk students. We don't have the same proportion of those in the Castle program that we do in our general population, but I feel like we have a really great plan to make sure, and the goal was really to make sure that it was truly representative and just an option, not better, not worse, just an option. Starting sooner this year, I just feel like we're ahead of the game in that. So we talked about what data can we look at, and attendance is one, and behavior referrals is another, and Iowa assessments and grades and common formative assessments, and we're looking at all of that stuff for sure. If you look at it, then you could easily say, oh, the Castle program's outstanding. Well, you know, there is
more.
yeah, we just
Yeah.
and it's a pilot, it's the first year, right? And we would need to see it over a couple of years, I think, before we would know how much of a difference it makes. And some kids, I mean, I think the feedback that we've gotten has been really positive, but the kids sometimes who are most likely to speak up might be saying something positive. It will be interesting to see when we survey them if there are kids who are feeling like maybe there are frustrating parts of it, or they don't like being constantly in this group or with the same kids. Maybe they're feeling things that they're just not articulating to us.
Now, you alluded to this is based on a Cedar Rapids program. Is that Cedar Rapids big you're talking about? Or
No,
something?
the program, we went up there to Franklin Middle School where they were just starting a program like this, and they're very, very new in it also. And so that's what we just sort of observed, and that's, I don't know that we really even modeled it off of that.
It was
That just got
we
our
went to
brains
Waukesha,
going.
Wisconsin
Yeah.
as a team also, where they have, and kind of to go back, like why not for everybody? Up in Waukesha, all of the schools that we visited was just an optional learning and really getting kids to reflect on like, how do I learn best?
Right.
What type of environment do I need as a learner? And so we went to 2 different middle schools where they had 2, school within a school models happening, and we were able to see just, they were more established, a couple years out, and that is really kind of where we started to be like, all right, this is kind of our end goal. This is really what we would like to see. It was great to go to Cedar Rapids and see just the starting points, but that provided a really large picture for us in terms of like an end product.
The Wisconsin schools were farther in the path to personalized learning.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's very much a progress. Like I said, we're trying to do baby steps too. Okay.
Yeah.
By the end, we want to give you a lot more ownership and choice, but you work toward that, and certainly those other schools were farther in personalization.
And the one thing I'll say too is the rest of our, like they talked about how we have a lot of initiatives going. The rest of our teachers, the rest of our staff is doing an awful lot of things in their classes too. So they talked about like going to blended learning, which is workshop at Grant Wood that we are now in our 2nd year, but we have 2 really big teams going there. I think we've got more than any of the other schools do because we have found it so successful in our classes. That doesn't require the CASEL program. That's just changing within your own classroom. So I would say that, a lot of our teachers and a lot of our curricular areas are also changing up kind of what they're doing and moving to more blended, personalized learning. The big benefit with CASEL is that they have the block of time and the shared teachers. So there are other content areas, like for a long time, Global Studies and Language Arts would talk about that global issues essay because they would all do it. The benefit here is that you're doing it at the same time, same teacher, same block. So, I don't want this to sound like, well, everybody else is straight traditional, get your textbook out. That's not what's going on here at all. All of our teachers are, engaged in a lot of really innovative and just different things that they're trying in their classes too. So the big thing with this is just the way that it's set up.
And I do like the blended learning in my classroom in literacy and afternoon, but by the time you get started, you have 35 minutes to really get going, and that type of work, it's really challenging with the class period. So
Another data point you might look at is how kids do when they transition to high school, and
Yeah.
maybe follow them along the way and see, because I'd be interested to get their reflection after, like this point in the year in 9th grade, like
Right.
you had that in 8th grade, now you're in high school where, it's more the traditional model. How did that work for you with the transition?
Yeah.
Better, worse? I mean,
That's
we
the thing
talked
I
about
think
that too.
When you're like, who would it not be? I could see a parent perspective being like, well, this is secondary school now. You need to be ready for high school. You need to learn how high school is now to go into that. But my perspective is I see it as a bridge. I see it as because they still go to their afternoon classes.
yeah, their afternoon classes still
They
provide
still
that
have
structure.
that time, but this is a good.
Well, we have the challenge at the high school. I mean, I think all of us want to do this cross-curricular type of teaching. You guys have just, I commend you that you're doing it.
We're
because
doing it.
We are doing it.
I love it. I think it's great.
And I think that was the big thing is everyone said, well, how can you, and the scheduling, he mentioned the scheduling. The scheduling is a huge, it's a nightmare, but it's fine. Like that's my nightmare and it's fine. Like you figure it out. Like it is doable. And I think for years, it had been talked about, and that's always the big thing is, well, it won't work because of the schedule. It will.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of work, and it is kind of a nightmare.
That
but
culture of yes.
yeah,
Make it happen.
yeah, yes, we are a culture of yes in this
But
building.
that's partially why you might ask, like, why is literacy not in there? Of course they could be. The schedule is a constraint that by doing it with 3 periods, it would allow us to now add another section, right? But the more sections you add, the more classes you add, that puts more strain on the schedule. So, of course, I mean, we incorporated art into one of our projects in the fall. I mean, and we could do that because we got all of our Castle kids in art first try. And that's another thing is we've been able to then incorporate the specials. And
Well, we want to include math, like we could really see a tie-in
Absolutely.
between math, but the scheduling thing is, not every 7th grader is in the same math class. There's the different levels of math, and so that scheduling hurdle is there.
But yeah, we do believe it would be great for all subjects to be involved.
Well, you said parents who want things to be predictable and structured, and life's not like that.
Exactly.
And that's always the downfall of secondary education is we are doing something that mimics nothing in the world.
Right.
We don't focus on things for 45 minutes and dig switch. Nobody does that.
Right.
So I think those of us in this field who are wanting to see these opportunities and as we have more of this, as we see these successes, scheduling will become less of an issue because we're scheduling around it. I do have some specific questions.
Sure.
One, how do you plan to get it more representative? Like you said, you had a plan, so what's that?
Well, we have thoughts for a plan. I don't know if we have a great plan yet. I think our what we're starting with is that last year we know that we sent out a Google form that we wanted parents to fill out that asked about, it had a lot of questions on it, like how does your child learn, how does this, and for some, they're going to look at that and they're not going to fill it out. So we, on the registration forms that will go home with 6th graders, it's a form, like after the kids hear us talk, we will talk. Every parent has to sign the registration form, so there's a place on there, I am interested in Castle. So that I feel like is going to help because then the kids can go home too and talk to their parents about, hey, they talked about this program. The parents might say, what is it? And they're like, I really want to do it, I really want to do it. So that I feel like is going to be much better than the system last year, and it's not a cumbersome form and it'll go directly home. It has to come back anyways. We also talked about, do we need to make sure that some of our buildings, almost like the RAM model where we're like allowing more spots to some of our buildings. So we talked about that. I think it's going to help that we just have 180 spots next year for 7th grade. So that's going to open it up quite a bit more. We still want to make it an option, so we still want people to be able to opt in. But they all know, and they knew this year, that it was a lottery system. And so, we just put, if your school had more names than we had spaces, we just used a random name generator, created a wait list, and we had a few people who decided to opt out, and so then somebody else got in. But our plan is to work more closely with those elementary schools too, and maybe, like I said, kind of use that weighted resource model almost, so that we make sure that we're getting more parents who maybe aren't always as active or involved, just reaching out, spending more time to reach out to them.
Great. And so my other question to tag on that, you said that some of those kids who kind of do school, who know how to take the test and maybe aren't engaged, but what about those kids who traditionally don't do very well? So what did you see from those struggling learners, and how did they respond to that, to the program?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is with these projects, finding opportunities to allow them a voice in what they're going to learn about, right? So for some of them, part of what they've struggled with is they're bored. And so a lot of part of the impetus behind these projects is to give them a voice and have a say in what they want to learn about, and to decide how they want to demonstrate their learning. And so I think that's been a benefit for some of those struggling learners. I will also say, to use an example of our essay, one of the benefits of this program for a struggling learner, especially, let's say it's an essay writing, right? Something that could be really difficult for anyone, no matter how, regardless of your skill. I was able to, within this, have more personal discussions with students about what they were struggling with by doing this way. And so my essays, even from students who are struggling learners, are just flat out better because of the personal discussions that we've been able to have. Mike mentioned being able to have these kids look at these standards and to be able to see where they're floundering and stop and say, we're meeting in 10 minutes. If you need to raise your hand and it's like, I don't get it, we're stopping. And we have the flexibility to stop. Because two of us can keep going, with the rest of the group. One person can just stop and say, we're going over here, and you're not going to make it past this if we don't get this. And so I think that's been extremely important for struggling learners, is just more communication with their teacher and the ability to just stop when we have to.
We get to have essentially our intervention block, our little hawk time in class, in the moment, with the teachers that it matters with. Whereas, our ratios are the same. We still have 30-to-1 ratio, but not all 30 of those kids need us.
Right.
We can pull the ones that they do need us, go to this part of our 3 rooms, and have a little session. So I think that's great for the struggling learners.
And I would add to that too, so much of the time with my struggling learners is I have to kind of get one-on-one with them and talk through the issue, and that just takes a significant portion of a normal class period. And if I find out from a student, I talked about this with Ms. Kopecki already, I can just say, go keep talking about it with Ms. Kopecki. Go right back over here. We don't have to have that 10-minute conversation about, well, what was your essay about again? So I think it's so much more effective that way. And then two, when I get to a student that's really struggling, generally I find I'm the second or third person to get there, or maybe the fourth. We had a substitute teacher come in one day, and so I was the fourth adult to look through and read this essay and give the student some similar feedback, and just make sure that they're really hearing this from so many different points of view, but also really getting a lot of consistency from every one of those people. I think is just really powerful. Yeah.
Paul needs to leave.
Oh, sorry.
I would stay. My daughter's over there with a friend, and I'm responsible for the friend as well. So if it was just my daughter, I would make her stay. I just want to say real quick 2 things. One, I hope we can expand this out in the district into other places as well. I think it's good. The second thing is that in September I went to the All Metro board member, at Kirkwood, where Kingsley and Matt did a presentation. And one of the ones I went to was actually the Grantwood Area Education presentation about blended learning. And so I pulled out my notes to look at it, and it's kind of funny because everything that I took notes on, you guys have said. Ownership of learning, it's in the hands of the student control, teachers are the facilitators. Questions that kids are looking at are, why am I learning? Why am I learning this? What am I learning, and how will I know I learned it? So I see all of that in here, and I think it's great. So I just wanted to quick shout out that I thought it was funny. Everything I wrote down was all presented here. It's all being done. So that's great, and I hope that, I know Matt's in favor of blended learning. He's talked about that before. So, and it sounds like you guys are as well. So if it's something that we can expand and it's helpful, I think that'd be great. So.
I think the key words you hear are personalized, individualized, blended, different model. I mean, I think the data points are something we obviously have to look at, but it's kind of the same argument I get into with either principals or teachers sometimes about homework, right? We always want to talk about the value of homework, or if it has no value. And I think one of our first things is to do no harm, right? I mean, even if we don't see a substantial bump in this, I mean, what are the things we're not measuring that are increased from those students that are anecdotal pieces you guys are all talking about, or that we don't have systems to measure, where we feel like our kids are getting a different experience and one that's more relevant? Because I just shook my head when you talked here earlier, JP, about, we constantly want to prepare for that next thing until that next thing is life, and it doesn't look like anything we've subjected, our students or our youth to for how long. And so I think that's where we have to be willing to step outside the box in some of these areas and try something different. I know that the teacher talk versus the student talk in those classrooms is completely different. And like Michelle said, we have great teachers, not only in this building, across the district, trying to do these different things. But this is not how they experience school. It's not how they were trained to deliver instruction. So it's all new learning for them. And so it's a huge undertaking for them to totally rethink this model and to provide a different experience for our kids.
Well, and I'll just interrupt you there for a second there, Matt. I did kind of have something like this. I went to Southeast. And we had
so why weren't you doing it right away then?
We had language arts and global studies combined. Okay, so I had Terrell Bachman still here as my global studies, and Pete Muir. Okay, if you've been in Iowa City, you know Pete Muir. Okay, And, you know, I don't remember every single lesson we did in those classes. But I remember being a group, and I remember the curtain, the accordion curtain between our two rooms opening up and doing projects together. Okay, I remember knowing those kids, and I thought it was a really cool thing. And I enjoyed that. So that's one thing that's always running through my head, and was like, I was picking Terrell's brain when we were kind of developing this. What made it work? What made it work? How did you decide what to do? Because that was something that I did get here in this district as a kid that I remember being really beneficial to me.
So I just have a couple. So one thing that makes me very excited is the collaboration. I know that's what I always really missed. You know, you want to collaborate, but how do you make that logistically work? And so that's very exciting. And I'm wondering about bringing in like special ed or ELL or other sort of areas that might have some other levels of expertise in differentiation or language to help that team model. And then you said it's a ton of work, and what I'm wondering is is a lot of that just on the front end to develop it, and then subsequent years it's going to, like all teaching,
right? Yeah.
The first year is the hardest, and so as the years go on, is it going to level out a little bit? And you'll have the model to hand to the next team and say, hey, here's what we did. Don't reinvent the wheel.
Right.
You know,
Right.
or you don't have to.
And at the same level, you kind of hope that as you develop it, it gets stronger all the time. And if you're really going to make a move toward personalized learning, that the model that we have, I mean, even when I look at what we do right now, I'm like, how much of that would we actually do, right? And I mean, how much farther should we be going? And so I think that's the other thing we have to look at is, I mean, where can we go with it? And I mean, I even look at how I teach global studies right now, and likely won't be the same next year, you know what I mean? And so I think some of that is just a matter of, it's not about the work, it's just a matter of, you know, anything that you do, you got to be making it better all the time. And I think that's certainly where we're at right now is, let's be as critical as we can about what we're doing, you know what I mean? And so that we're making a better product all the time.
I also think with personalized learning, you know, really it should eventually be in the hands of the learner, which could potentially, if they are bringing in, you know, different topics, different ideas, different ways that they want to show their understanding, that could change from year to year. And for a lack of a better word, the training of the students could potentially be the same at the beginning, because it is a lot of work at the beginning to get these kids to like, wait, I have to decide if I need to go to this lesson? You're not going to tell me? Okay, I'm going to sit this out. You didn't tell me, but then now I'm floundering. You know what I mean? Like that reflection within the learner is a really big shift. And so that will, I would assume, be kind of the same in terms of every single year getting their minds wrapped around this. But you know, while some of the projects might maintain the same, I think if you're really trying to get to that personalized learning level, there are going to be always chances of, you know, different things coming to the table that they want to talk about.
Oh, you have different kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
It's always going to be a lot
Yeah.
more because you're building relationships with a different set of kids.
So kind of going back to your point of like the collaboration, one thing that has made it successful is, you know, we have the same prep. We have a common prep time to sit down and work on that. And that has been key. So if you're really looking for ways to get collaboration amongst teachers, is you have to give them that time to get together and do meaningful work. And so if we had common prep time with every teacher or any teacher who want to communicate or collaborate with, it would be it'd be a really good thing. Or that would be an integral piece.
It
to
wouldn't
making- to
happen. If
facilitate
you were
that.
trying to put this into different buildings, if you did not have that planning time, it wouldn't happen.
Oh, right, yeah.
They're
No,
just,
which is again the logistical
Yeah.
piece on
Yep.
your end to try
Yes.
to make that.
Yep.
Well, and I think like you brought up like ELL and special ed, I think like, I mean, this is so exciting that we have started to feel like sometimes the wheels are coming out from underneath of us as we start to go so fast. Because at one time we're like, let's just do it for all 7th graders next year. Like we were so excited, like we're just gonna blow it up. Like let's just do it for everybody. And then we're like, okay,
numbers work out.
yeah, like we can have shelter, we can do this. We were, because you just get so excited. But I do think that part of what has made this really successful is starting manageable enough. And I mean, there was a point where we had this meeting and we left there and we're all like, it's on. Next year, every 7th grader's in this, because you get so excited about it. But the reason it has worked so well is having, like they said, a strong team, all the logistics, and then starting manageable. And so there is a huge part of us that I know is like next year, yeah, we're going to double it. But I mean, there is still a strong pull to just say, let's just do it across the
So
board.
are teachers get other teachers like excited? And
Very,
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
very excited.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think it's reasonable to take another step next year before we go, but I would say that there's, the sky is the limit. I mean, we absolutely think we could include sheltered classes in this. In the beginning, we're like, oh no, ELL has sheltered classes. Well now, I mean, they've talked, and Michelle teaches a sheltered class. She's like, I could totally do that in here. She's like, we can totally get this curriculum into this. So, but it's just, again, being manageable and, you know, beginning with a purpose, I think is huge, because if you were to just start this in another building and say, hey, just do this, like, you really have to do all of that foundation work of why are we doing this? What is the purpose? You know, what is not working in our current model? Because if you don't develop that as a team yourself, then just simply putting the steps in motion just won't work.
Absolutely.
So
I see this, you know, I'm a science guy, so I see how this is a change from short-term memory to long-term memory in learning. And the cross-curricular thing, I really like the look of it, and they're trying to do it at the other junior highs just in very different ways, right, to a certain degree. And, you know, if you come with that strength of, I'm really good at science, and I can make that mental connection of how, from my science perspective, how it affects, you know, a social studies point or a literacy point, and you just come at it from your own strength, it makes that connection in your brain and it lasts longer, you know, as opposed to that traditional, I've got these problems, I learned how to do it, I take my test at the end of the week, and that's gone now. Let's move on to the next thing. And getting kids to learn how they learn best is not something that ends at junior high, right? Like, when I hire people at work, the first thing I ask them in an interview is, how do you best learn something? And the ones that are the most successful when I hire them are the ones that know the answer to that. And there's not a lot of them that know the answer to that. And I think getting them to figure that out earlier in life is a really good thing, and it'll help them much farther past school, just learning life.
You might hire some of our kids one
focus
day.
that we've had.
Well, I think the focus, I think we probably kind of glossed over with our projects. The focus for our kids, the first several weeks, we had 3 major goals. They did their learning style inventories to really focus on what kind of learner they are. We focused really on like this idea of a growth mindset and being able to move from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, that just be willing to, every once in a while you're going to fail and it's okay, and what are you going to do when that happens? We focused a lot on communication. What are you going to do when you don't agree with your group? You know what I mean? How are you going to handle it? And then goal setting. And what do you want out of the year? Like, what is your hope? What is your goal out of the year, you know, for your learning? And so that was really our focus the first several weeks before we ever attempted a project with a group. You know what I mean? And to try to
community building.
Right.
Can I have you come and talk to them? I think they could really benefit on doing that.
You bet.
Any other questions?
It's fantastic.
Yeah, on board.
Super energized, exciting.
Good.
We've drunk, I mean, I feel like
Get
I've drunk
goosebumps.
a little bit. Sign me up.
that's
So hopefully we can get an update at a future ed committee meeting, maybe at the end of the year or something like that, whenever you feel like you've got, you know, more of your story to tell and you're thinking about next steps.
And I'd really like to hear how it's going, how the 6th grade reach out is going, and how we're getting those populations that the kid might not run home and tell mom they get excited, and how are we going to get more of those kids?
Have you guys had any feedback from parents, or is this the first you've heard about it?
No, we've had some parents saying, how come my kid's not in the program? How did that work?
So will there be a plan that pushes at North Central Northwest?
Yeah.
So, I think yes, in a way, I guess is the easy answer to that question. North Central's taken on some to try to do some increased teaming and to think about that. I think, you know, some of those barriers we talk about are different hurdles in different buildings about how to overcome that piece. But, you know, I think anytime you start something, you want to have something that's successful, and then you want the others to see that it's successful and see why this would be encouraging. But I would lie to you if you can't get 3 teachers to say yes and be excited about it, or to want to do that and to have bought into it, or a principal that says, hey, this is what we're going to do and we're going to make it happen. You know, I mean, I can say it, but we have to have that commitment buy-in. So that's the process I think we're in some of those other spots, is to say, okay, how does this work for your building? What would be the successes? You can see what are the things you're worried about. How could we step into something like this? And then, of course, even though I just said here in my last comments about the evidence basis, I think we would want to have evidence based right before we just jump and do something whole hog too, right? I mean, we want to have some good confidence that this is impacting our kids in a positive way, and I trust these guys' judgment, and I know that those are good things that we're hearing, but at the same time, I want to be able to put some numbers to it to say, this is why it's so important for us to do it at this point too.
And really, this did come like from this team. Like we went and visited some schools, and we were like, and by the time we came back, we were like, we're doing it. Let's go. And
Michelle didn't tell us to
like,
do this.
yeah, like it was just, it came from that collaborative piece of like, we want to work together. We are willing to meet in the summer. We are willing to meet outside of school, you know, and you know, you would, I feel like, to just shove that onto schools and say, hey, look at what Southeast is doing. This is cool. You guys do it. That same, you have to have that same, you know, drive and buy-in from people to be able to make that work.
Well, I guess I see it. Other people, I'm sure, are getting excited about this. Yeah, I think I would, to speak to that point, say, like having never felt as energized as a teacher by like the people around me and by making those connections, I think it would be very easy now, having done this in sort of a small scale, to speak to teachers with a teacher's perspective of here's why this is so valuable to you and why putting in this much extra work gives you just an incredibly big difference in terms of what you see after that. So
I think kids and parents will be our biggest salespeople for it. The story I told Michelle, I don't know if she remembers, but this is what I think about every time I think about the Castle thing is, you know, the people she'd have asking her about it continually, is my kid get into it or upset their kid's not into it, you know, something like that. And I'm like, Michelle, they don't even know if it's good yet. But that's how hungry our people are for something that feels and the experience is different in our system. And so we knew it was going to be good, right? We knew that things would happen and that things would go really well, but I think that's just a sign of where we're at. And so the more people that experience it can talk about it and share that this is what it's like, that's going to be a driver for change too.
I think it puts forth an excellent opportunity for instructional coaches as well to take advantage of those resources that are available to teachers in the district. Kelsey has been a big help. I'm on the innovation team for that. So I know that lessons I've learned from the coaching or the PD I've got from the coaching perspective has helped me as well with that. So.
Is there any planning in place for them to present to the other junior high staffs?
No, we haven't planned anything that way yet, but
it's tomorrow.
Thursday.
Thursday. We are presenting at a Grant Wood conference in April on personalized. They reached out and asked if we would present there. So
So you'll have it all ready to go?
Yep.
So
I think the answer
take it on
is,
the road.
of course, we would be more than willing. You know what I mean? If people were interested, yes, of course we would be interested. I mean, we're loving what we're doing, and we would be more than happy to share that with others that were interested.
I think we've extended an invitation now to say if anybody wants to tour, you know, that's the
we have offered
a lot of people.
Not
Not a lot, but we've had
Linn-Mar's
coming to tour. We've had a couple of different you know, people reach out, different school districts reach out and ask to schedule something where they talk, you know, to admin, and then they come and observe, then they talk to the teachers, and so there's a couple of different groups of people that have been interested.
Yeah, we definitely put it out there that we are open for business.
Exciting.
Come stop by.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you for having us.
Okay, so we're moving to our last topic of the night, and this is a follow-up from our last board discussion around safety and security. We just wanted to spend a little bit of time tonight getting clear on how we want to address this topic. We weren't looking for any presentations or, you know, big, long discussions. Just sort of as a board, I think we've all heard, whether it's through parent input from local junior high, some of the listening posts that we've all attended, there's been some concerns expressed by teachers and parents around safety in some of the schools, and I think we just want, as a board, to have a conversation of how do we address it? How do we make sure we've got some actions or activities underway so that we can understand the issues, not do knee-jerk responses, but really what's going on and what information might we need to understand what's really going on. And so I think we're just trying to have a discussion tonight about the topic and what we need to be doing to collect data to understand it, and then ultimately getting into a path of correcting. If there's things to be corrected, what would those be?
Yeah, well, I put it on the, brought it up at the board meeting, and I think a few thoughts I have on where the discussion can go is school culture. I know, you made a very good comment that, what you learn in the school is different from real life, but school has a culture in and of itself, and I think we have to look at student expectations and student conduct and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, that type of a thing, and accountability and consequences along those lines as well. And I know that we've got 4 new members, all in a row. A discussion it's come up in the past. The discussion about resource officers and what that may look like and that type of a thing. A discussion along those lines, bringing people in to discuss that as well. We have had some incidents that, the listening post safety and security is something that's coming back to us a lot. And how can you learn if you don't feel safe in the building, and concerned about those things. So that's kind of how I look at it, or what I was looking when I kind of put that in. And I think it's something that it's not a one and done. It's the type of thing we want a lot of community input. And when we get into some of those discussions, there are going to be a lot of people on both sides that way, and they're probably going to be better in maybe a public listening post or some type of a place where community can have a lot of share their inputs with us and everything that way. And I don't think it's a short discussion. I think it's something that's not a one and done. I think it's kind of an ongoing thing. But I think to a certain extent, we got to start with, okay, this is what we expect in our buildings, and that you're not going to go anywhere in life if you're swearing in public places or in your business or anything like that, and that what's not acceptable in the real world we can't accept in our buildings and things like that, and start that conversation.
So I'm interested too in some what's going on, and I don't want to leap to solutions.
Sure, neither, right.
Whether it's resource officers or whatever might come up as potential solutions. I'm trying to understand what's happening, and it may be different in different schools, or maybe different factors, right?
I think that's a good point. I was just going to bring that up. Right now, we've heard from 3 listening posts, 3 buildings. So I think one of the first steps, I would assume that each school has some similar concerns, but we don't know that for sure. So I think as a board, before we even start looking at just the solutions based on the 3 buildings we know there's issues, but for me to feel comfortable that we're finding the right issues and concerns, not only for our students, but especially for our staff, we have to get into those buildings and talk to those people, because they're the ones right there with our students. And it's presented differently from all 3 schools.
And there's different points of views within each school too. So that's what I would be curious to get ideas on, and how do we dig in and understand sort of what's happening. You talk about culture, Phil, I think that's right. And what's the culture of the different schools, and what might be leading to some of the behaviors that we're seeing, and really understand the issues before we start talking about solutions and bringing, doing listening posts and things like that. I feel like I need some more information before we just open up.
And we also have a really good model that should be the same at all of our schools, and that's a multi-tiered system of support. So whatever you call that, there's something you do for every single student in the building. And so we have to understand what that, and that's where those expectations come in, right? Those standard, whatever that is for the building. And we have to make sure that we are doing that with fidelity.
Yeah.
That every kid who walks into that building is ready to understand, at least I know what the level 1 stuff is. I understand that the expectation in this building is cell phones, whatever it is.
Right.
That's established, and that every kid has been directly taught that, and there's no assumption that they should know it. We should assume they don't, and we teach it to them directly. So if this is going to happen K-12, and it's happening with fidelity K-12, eventually our 9th graders are going to be ready for 9th grade for the most part. So we have to nail that, right? We have to get that tier 1, and then the rest follows. But I think sometimes we just, as a system, we absolutely assume that kid's going to bring a pencil to class, and it's a mistake. Because as soon as we don't know what that kid went through that morning, that bringing that pencil is more than they can handle because of what they've been through in their life and that morning. So we have to start wrapping our head around that, right? Each of these kids, so that's what we have to do. And the community input is great, Phil, but right now I can tell you who's going to be at those meetings, and I can tell you who's not going to be at those meetings, and we're not going to hear from parents we need to hear from. And many of them are going to be scared to go to that because they don't want to get yelled at by a bunch of people about how bad their kid is. And so we have to be mindful, like, who are we inviting to these meetings? How are we going to make sure we get the voices of parents who need to be there in a way that they feel safe to share their story? And so I'm all for the broad community stuff. I think we're going to have to do some targeted stuff. And I frankly like the circle model. And I think that if we can get some groups of parents, because the truth is, our tippy tier 3 kids, we know who they are. We might not know who they are, but the schools do. They have names and they have families, and they're not a bunch of them. There's a few of them. And so we don't want to like single them out in this big public meeting, but in a small group, we do have to sit down because we all know parent engagement is a huge barrier. And that a lot of the kids who struggle the most, parents also struggle to be engaged. And it just, because I can tell you, those tippy kids, I used to see them, and now I'm still seeing them because they end up on the inpatient unit. And I can tell you, I'm seeing them in a different light, but I know what's going on for them from this 60,000 foot level, and then I know what's going on for them personally, and I guarantee you, almost every one of their stories is going to break your heart because it ain't what we're all used to. And so and that to me is part of that tier 1 piece. That we say, these are the expectations we've set for all of our kids, and we, Liberty and Weston City, that's not going to be a carbon copy of one another, but essentially they're the same expectations. We all had, we don't want them swearing at teachers. That's probably not shooting for the moon, right? We can say, hey, that's pretty standard expectation that we're not going to, be cursing teachers. Pretty standard expectation, you go to class. If you're assigned to a class, you go and you're not wandering the hallway. So we need to make sure we're getting that, and then how we do it, because the truth is we got to put out some fires. We do have to put out fires, but we can't lose sight of this long-term systemic, because talk about school resource officers. I can think of one who'd be good, but we have more communities than that. Right?
No, and the reason I mentioned it was just not that I'm thinking it is a solution or preconceived that we're headed that way, but I think we have to, from what I'm getting, and I'm sure you're getting it from parents too, that it needs to be considered, it needs to be talked about.
Yeah, we have to have a discussion.
And let's face it, 20 years ago, how many times did we lock a building down?
Yeah, times are different.
20 years ago, how many times did we have gunfire outside of an elementary school?
Oh, yeah.
That type of a thing. And when we've got an incident at a school where we've got 2 students that are unconscious, that's a concern. And I'm looking just to get it started. And your points are very valid about the voices in those discussions, and many times it's the same voices and everything that way. And I'm completely open to it. But I want to make sure that we have the discussion now before we're forced into a discussion at a point where then people come and they say, well, why didn't, with information that was brought to you, why did you not act?
So what can we do then, systemically? I mean, this is not, we're not going to solve this on the Ed Committee, and we're not going to solve it at the board table, but...
So can I jump in?
Yeah. Yes.
So, your idea of the triangle, I think maybe that's something Amy and I can work on, is bringing back almost something in a triangle format to say, here's what we try to do from a tier 1 perspective, tier 2, tier 3. You guys read about the things or get your emails about some of that stuff that happens in the tier 3 that went way wrong, right? Well, what all led up to that, or what did we try to do in the meantime to that? And I think then it's probably also being honest about a conversation about where we think we're being successful and what we're honestly struggling with. And I think that's what Phil's almost trying to hit at here, is what do we need to be a little bit transparent about, and kind of looking ourselves in the mirror and saying, hey, maybe we're not doing as good here, and maybe we do have some risks that, you know, we need to be well aware of, and making sure we feel good about the response we're putting into place and some of those things, whatever those potential solutions way down the road might look at. But I think Amy and I could come back with a pretty good format of, here's what we're trying to do as those basic expectations, here's what we try to do when we see an increased need, and, you know, here's what we do for the tip of the iceberg, you know, situations that we're really struggling with. And then, like I said, the second part of that is saying, okay, is that enough, right? Or we, you know, these things we're seeing or hearing about, what else should we be doing, or what else could we be trying to do?
And I know we had talked, and now this is all going to blend together when we did with maybe P&G about at the Ed Committee really getting an understanding of PBIS and multi, just getting educated ourselves.
Yeah.
And then as I'm sitting on these committees and hearing all this kind of intersection, and you know, with Circe here and Ellen, who was at the equity meeting, because that group is doing a bang-up job at tying the comprehensive equity plan, right, meeting our standards and our goals. And so I know I have an email and I had forwarded to you, Jen, I'll throw it out here, that it could be really helpful for us on the second meeting of every month to get an update from the comprehensive equity plan, from the equity group about CEP, because they've got it mapped out kind of how we have it mapped out. February is this, March is this, we're going to tackle these things, and it was inspiring to see, frankly, in so many areas of our district, how we're doing this work. It is moving in the same direction. We all have the same things in mind, and I think we're right to, let's do it systemically, and we do have to put out some fires. And we you know, the last thing we want to do is be having some reactive conversation after something truly tragic happens, and we're looking at ourselves and what could we have done. And it's not that we're not doing things. We are doing things, but I think I'm seeing some really exciting opportunities for the district to be moving in the same direction on multiple fronts, because we're really all talking about the same thing, which is making sure all of our kids, you know, are ready for life as an adult.
I'll just echo what Matt had to say. First of all, I think this is a really important discussion that we're having. It's difficult. I mean, we're experiencing some difficult situations in some of our buildings, and I think it's just really good for the board to kind of build an understanding of where we're at. And as much time it will take is to kind of start back at square one, I do think it's important to understand what we're doing for all students in Tier 1, and then what that looks like, it could look like at Tier 2, and how do they graduate up to Tier 2? Not to graduate in that is a good thing necessarily, and then what does that look like for them to come up to Tier 3? And then what are those kinds of behaviors that we are seeing at Tier 3? You know, those intense behaviors. I know what you guys, like Matt said, or somebody around the table said, you hear about the Tier 3 kiddos or the kiddos that have behavior goals that are in special ed. But I think it's important to build your understanding of kind of what we have in place, the staffing that is supporting the kind of behavior needs that we have. Because you could see last week in that staffing sheet that there are some additional staff supplied to some of our buildings to help support behavior. And we're open to ideas and perspective, but I think it's really important to kind of go back to square one, and so that you feel confident or at least knowledgeable about what is happening. And that
I think it would help us feel confident too that we're employing strategies that you guys are supportive of, right?
Yeah.
And that we're not suggesting things or exploring paths that we're out of bounds for, or things that way too. I mean, I think that would give us, you know, a good sense of continuity, you know, in team, in that sense that, okay, this is something you guys want to see more of. It would help, you know, either direct our leadership efforts on that end, or to share with you guys, hey, we think we could try this.
So is it maybe the next ed committee that could be our?
Or is that more like a retreat or work session?
Yeah, I don't know.
I think that might, I mean, where it's a deeper dive.
Okay. And not more of a
into it.
presentation.
Yeah, okay.
It probably comes down to when, I mean, how much
Right.
time would you need to put this together? Because, I mean, this is pretty involved, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, the basic stuff, I think, you know, we have some of that data that's going to come back to you for the secondary at the January meeting, so we'll be prepared to do that. I think that's a little bit of what Amy's talking about, and then I think it's also pulling some of our programming pieces and giving some description and some context around some of those. So, I don't know, I think
yeah, I think how it depends how deep you wanted to go. Maybe
Right.
in January we could just really talk about what's happening at Tier 1, and then we come back in February and talk about what happens at Tier 2 and Tier 3 and how that looks similar or different at elementary versus secondary.
that'd be a good way to break it down instead of trying to take it all at once.
Sure. Which profoundly difficult work. I mean, you can get reports and you can explain it theoretically. I mean, that's fantastic. But what you guys saw when you went out to your listening post is how hard it is. I mean, that's what I think people don't get unless you're in a building that has kids every day and you're classroom teacher or support staff or an administrator is how hard it is.
Well, it's kind of like the assumption like we all have that, yeah, we don't want kids swearing at teachers, and yeah, we should teach expectations. We teach expectations, we don't want kids swearing and they swear.
So
adults.
Now what?
Now what?
Yeah.
Well,
What are the consequences? Because
I have, Brady. I know very well how
Right.
hard this is because I'm a tier 3 guy, right? So
Right,
I know
yeah.
viscerally that it's difficult. But if you don't start with the plan, you
I
can't have
understand.
any plan of fidelity.
But that's where if you want it, I mean, if you go out this time of the year to your teachers, I mean, this was amazing. Obviously, we have amazing teachers and staff, but you're gonna think you have more hot spots than you probably have in your brain. So I think that's the challenge, is trying to figure out how you.
We've had unprecedented things happen this year, just based on. We've had 2 teachers at a building just resign mid-year. I mean, that's never happened in the years I've been involved in the school district. Where 2 teachers said, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore." We have teachers afraid, fearful of coming to work. I mean, we're at a level that, and we just want to make sure that you guys are aware of where things are at.
Right. Well, and that's why the discussion is started, because I've heard from those 2.
Because at a board level, right?
That's where it's hard.
We're here, but we have to be sensitive to that. So that's the putting out fire piece. I think the problem I've always had in education is that's all we ever do is put out fires because there's so many fires. And so how then do we step back and do the systemic stuff so that because I get it, I know. So when I taught, I had kids that teachers were afraid of, that they had no reason to be afraid of, but they were. But it was irrational. It wasn't based in, it was just their cultural bias, or they're not used to seeing this behavior. And so I've had that experience with, so I know, and I know if we're afraid of our kids, what can we do, right, to support our staff so that we're not feeling that way? And that's for you guys to go back and say, well, what do we need other than officers in our school? Which
I think you kind of nailed it. That I think at a board level that our purview is the long-term solution. It's not the putting out fires, right? We get asked to do that all the time by emails asking me to put out that fire, and I have no way to do that.
John, get over there.
Right?
Yeah, right.
It really is digging in deeper as what is a long-term sustainable thing, and we can divorce ourselves from the putting out fires because we can't do it anyway. We have to be very cognizant of it and make sure that people who can kind of put out fires are, attempting to do that, right? And
have the resources.
Then move on and figure out some of those long-term things.
I think that's where that trauma-informed lens comes in, where we're not necessarily trying to react to a child when they're in crisis, but giving them the tools to know themselves socially and emotionally so that they're not making those unsafe choices, or they have other things that they can do in the moment rather than have that reaction that they're having, because we're seeing it at the elementary level. And a lot of people think, well, they're littler and it's not as big of an issue, but I think that's part of the issue with staff, is that it's hard to say a 6-year-old punched me today, but a 6-year-old punched me today, and how do I deal with that? Where do I go? There's a lot of uncertainty for staff of what do I do when something like that happens, because our initial goal isn't that person needs to go to jail or in trouble or whatever, but we don't know how to help that student. So I think coming up with some sort of trauma-informed way to say, this is how we support kids who are in crisis, this is how we support kids who are not making safe choices, then that will make it feel better, because it would feel like we had a system or to go to, whereas right now, everything for us is still on that individual case-by-case basis, and that doesn't always feel safe. So.
The kind of interesting paradox you talk about there is, I think we're gaining clearer confidence on the things we shouldn't do, but we're not completely honed in on all the things that we should do, right? And I think that's a little bit of the kind of pull we're in right now, is we know we shouldn't jump to that response, and we shouldn't be using those type of behaviors to correct the situation, but we're not real super confident this is working, or that this is exactly what we should do. And I think we're getting there. I mean, I think we're trying some things and working through that, but I think that's where we're having some of those issues crop up.
If I can't do this,
and that's
the last we want to have.
Guidance counselors, nurses, who do we need in place to be able to help make some of those decisions. that
And
we don't
it's
have
it's a
now.
conversation with a lot of entities, and very early on when Lori and I were on, there was a change in the flip book that had elementary principals calling the police because a first grader said he was going to kill the next kid in line. We went through that, okay? And that's why when I'm saying I want a broad discussion and everything, so I don't want, and I'm not preconceived anything along those lines. And one of the things that during that discussion, I talked with the University of Iowa care assessment team. It's their threat assessment team, but they call it the care assessment team because they recognize that when they have a student that starts behaving in a way, they try and hone in and say, okay, exactly what's causing this to happen. And one of the things that they started to do is to coordinate information with the Iowa City Police Department, with the Johnson County Sheriff's Department, things like that, because you may have somebody living in a building that the U of I care assessment team doesn't understand that the police came to that house 4 times in a week. Well, everybody in that house is under a different stress level than people in houses that didn't have the police come to there 4 times in a week. But if you don't know that information and someone starts acting up different from that group, then you're thinking, well, this is why is this? Well, when that information is shared in a stovepipe type area, well, then some of the pieces come together, and then you can kind of see, okay. And that happens with us with our students. You have students that are in stressful situations, and if we've got that information, it just helps us make a better decision.
Thanks, Nancy. So, thank you for that. Question, maybe for you, Amy, and JP, and I guess all of us. I appreciate everyone's comments and perspectives on what's going on, and I mean, I think it helps us understand the situation more specifically. The process, Amy, that you and Matt talked about, going through the tiers, will that help suss out where we might be having some of the gaps maybe that Monique was describing, that we're not quite sure how to respond in certain cases or who to go to? I mean, if we follow the process that you guys outlined, would we get there to a richer understanding of where we have gaps and we need to start filling those gaps to start building out our longer, more systemic approach?
Yeah, I'm not sure that all of that will come out, but I don't think we should start anywhere but talking about PBIS and the tiers.
Okay.
But there's so many layers. As we're sitting and talking, I'm like, but when is this piece going to come up, and when is this piece going to come up? I just think that more we get into it, I think the questions that we entertain from you all will trigger a thought, oh, we need to get like all the way down the line. So we're talking about the proactive side, right? But we do have the discipline protocols and procedures manual, both the elementary and secondary level, that once we get to these level of behaviors that potentially are suspension worthy, there's been a ton of work by a group that you guys know better than I do that have set around to kind of do that side of things. So it just really depends on how far, like how deep and how wide do you want your knowledge base to become around a lot of different issues. And I do think it starts with PBIS.
So if we start with that.
Start there, and then we can see where that.
In a work session is what I'm hearing. It seems like the right form. Sometime towards the end of January, it sounded like.
Or education committee?
Yeah, so we have board meetings on the 9th and the 23rd.
In your senior highs, other than Liberty piloting or beginning in year 1 of PBIS, your senior highs aren't PBIS trained schools.
I know. But the truth is, whether you know it or not, you're actually doing some of it. You're doing something for every kid, right? And what we know is this stuff where it works. And when you do it with fidelity, there's good evidence-based stuff that says it's, we don't often get a gold standard in education. This is pretty close with the research base, done with fidelity, which is...
Well, we just have to say, like, when you do it,
Right.
we'll just have to remember that at
Yep.
the senior high level, saying, yes, we have our MTSS pyramid on behavior and social emotional aspects, but Liberty is just the only senior high that's in year 1, even of PBIS training. And Tate, and Tate actually is a well-functioning machine.
So I think
but it's scales.
That's a thing, right? That's like a topic for the district and how we move forward, and because these things need buy-in and all that kind of stuff.
So one thing I was going to propose was that we have our next education committee meeting at Tate, because I'd like to know more about Tate. This is kind of moving into agenda setting, so I know I'm kind of crossing over here, but that would be an opportunity for us to hear, like, what are they doing there that's working?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they have visitors come frequently.
Great.
So we'll take that as a request from the next ed committee at Tate, and we can have this conversation at the next ed committee if that works out, as long as it's in that time frame, end of January time frame.
So do we have a date for the next education committee?
No.
Okay.
The third.
That's what we landed on, right? The third
Is it the
Tuesday
third?
of the
Oh,
month.
third Tuesday,
Third
okay.
Tuesday.
Third Tuesday.
Which is, I don't.
That'd be the 16th of January.
Is that enough time though? 'Cause you don't
Well,
get
that's what
back
I'm
till
wondering,
the
is
week
so
before.
should we do the work session on the 23rd?
Yeah.
And then
I think the timing is better.
it'll be the conferences at Tate, potentially, it'll be right around in there
Yeah,
too. You're right
check
around the
their conference
midterm
schedule.
for year second.
Okay, let's take an action item. So we want it towards the end of January to give the team time to prepare for the presentation, and we'll have to sort out what works logistically with the request to have a session on tape. So I'm mindful of time, people are peeling off as it's getting late. So we'll take an action item to figure out where, when, and maybe do a doodle poll or communicate with board members that way to get it organized.
I think starting with hearing what they're doing at Tate fits perfectly
Yeah.
into this discussion.
Yeah, it for sure
so-
does.
And that doesn't have to be the deep dive. It can just be a
Right.
presentation.
They'll be, yeah.
So the 16th
You'll get a
might
very
work for
good
that then
understanding.
if it's not a deep
Right.
dive.
Or there is a 5th Tuesday, I hate to bring that up, not do the 16th and do the 30th, that'd give our team a little bit longer.
That's right. You want to aim for the
Kate would
30th?
probably appreciate having a little more than
Oh.
I think
1 week
it's-
notice, really. 'cause
Yeah, the
schools-
30th feels better, 16th feels really soon to say, hey, we're coming, hope you're gonna be there.
Let's do that.
So the 30th, Kim, would be the request at Tate.
PBS Tier 1, and then just a little bit of a presentation from Anne. Okay.
On what's working. I met with her over the summer, and that's
Okay.
all she talked about for almost 2 hours.
Oh, gotcha. I mean,
Yeah,
she's
it's
pretty good.
it's tough. I think what Brittany said, that you got to remember the scale.
The
Yeah.
scale
Oh,
is
yeah.
different.
The architecture of the building, there's one hole. I mean, they're able to do a lot of things at
Yeah.
Tate, and they do it well, but that aren't just going to be completely
That's
transferable
right.
to the
And I don't think any of
Yeah.
the, what works in the city is not going to work at West either. I mean,
Right.
these things have to be
Right.
tailored to the
Yeah.
building, but I think we have to understand. what-
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's a great presentation. They do a lot of
They do.
good stuff.
Okay. I think we're adjourned.
And I'd like to hear more like, from Ian, just also like how they identify students, what they do when they've got a student that needs it, when they have a waiting list, and all that.